Welcome to the Planning Commission from Monterey. Today is the Tuesday, the 13th, 2024. I'm going to start with approval of the minutes from the last meeting.
I think we'll need to do a roll call real fast first, just to acknowledge the commissioners present and the staff members present.
Can we do that?
Sure. Commissioner Fletcher has let us know that he will be absent. So we have here today Chair Dawson,
Here.
Vice Chair Bluth,
Here.
Commissioner Brassfield, Commissioner Freeman,
Here.
Commissioner Latassa,
Here.
and Commissioner Silva.
Here.
And the staff members present are our Planning Manager Levi Hill, our Senior Associate Planner Chris Schmidt, our Senior Associate Planner Christy Sabdo, and myself, Recording Secretary Erica Cabrera. And while I have the mic, I can go ahead and let the public know how to
Go
participate.
ahead.
Information on participating in this meeting and providing public comment, including remotely by Zoom or telephone, is on this meeting's agenda, which is online at isearchmonterey.org. Remote commenters will be muted until it's their turn to speak, and a timer will be shown on the screen. If you're connected on Zoom, the timer is accurate with no delay. In the chamber, we recommend keeping phones and devices muted to prevent audio interference with this meeting. Thank you for participating in your city government.
Thank you, Erica. Okay, now approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Has everyone had a chance to review those?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we have a motion?
Can we just check real
There's
fast
one
for,
typo.
yeah, we'll take a correction. I just want to make sure we open it up for a public comment before we get a motion.
Just the Sandy Freeman's name had the N chopped off on the front page.
I did notice that
Just
after the fact,
Thank you.
and I did correct it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Already done, huh?
All
Good.
right.
I was hoping you wouldn't see it.
You're way ahead of me. That's all I have.
Okay.
Do we have any members online, members of the public that want to speak on this item?
We have several attendees online. However, there are no hands raised.
Seeing none in
Is
the
there
chamber.
anyone in the room who would like to make a comment about the minutes from the last time? No. Okay, general public comments.
We'll still need a motion and a vote on the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second with Sandy. Roll call vote, please.
Chair Dawson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bluth,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield, Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Latassa,
Yes.
and Commissioner Silva.
Abstain.
Okay, go ahead and mark you as abstained. The minutes have been approved.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, can we see general public comments? Comments that are not on today's agenda, that is in our purview, are welcome now. Unless you don't want to do that. Okay. Okay, let's go to public hearing. Unless, of course, we have someone on, no hands up,
There are no hands raised.
no hands up. Okay, public hearing. Number 3, recommend to the city council that the fiscal year FY 24-25 neighborhood and community improvement program is consistent with the general plan, specific plan, area plans, master plans, coastal plans, traffic calming plans, and Move Monterey multimodal plan, not a project under CEQA. Okay, so that's number 3. Can we have a staff report on that, please?
Hi, my name is Christy Sabdo, Senior Associate Planner with the City of Monterey. I also have Reggie Paulding with Public Works here and Andrew Easterling over there, Public Works. We are going to be reviewing the NCIP fiscal year 2024-2025 projects with you and planning's review of the general plan and area plan consistency and CEQA determination. I'm going to have Reggie Paulding. He's going to begin the presentation.
Yeah, I got it. All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. As Christy said, my name is Reggie Paulding. I'm the NCIP staff coordinator and senior engineer here with the city. So just a brief overview. I know you all are familiar with NCIP, but the program has been in existence since 1987. And it was created to devote increased attention to the neighborhoods throughout the city and particular improving buildings, public facilities, parks, streets, and other public improvements. Back in 1988, voters adopted the what we call the NCIP program today. And this slide was pulled from the joint city council NCIP meeting we had back in July with and this presentation was given by assistant city manager Nat, where he talked about the various he pulled out various quotes from the charter amendment that was passed in 1988, where we talked about ensure that a minimum portion of city's annual budget is expended to improve residential neighborhoods of the city and provide capital projects for citywide benefit. Definition of capital projects, defining the portion 16% of transit occupancy tax dedicated to NCIP, and one representative from each neighborhood in the city. So what we did this year, we ran through the entire process starting in January. We had deadline for project submittals February 9th. We had a meeting, series of meetings started February 22nd, where we went through what we call a preliminary screening, where we identified, went through the projects, identified which ones qualified, which ones didn't. Specifically, projects have to qualify as a capital improvement in order to move forward. They also have to be within the city limits. Those are the two big ones. And so we had 69 new projects submittals. We had 31 returning projects. Just for your information, this will be the last year for returning projects. Returning projects were ones that were approved and funded back in 2020 when that funding was taken back by City Council to fund essential city functions during the pandemic. So in March through May, we had 4 committee meetings where we had public input. We reviewed projects in 2 halves. We reviewed projects in detail, looking at cost estimates and that sort of a thing. And then in June, we had voting night. We voted on 80 of the 100 projects. 20 were ruled out for various reasons, whether they didn't qualify as a capital improvement project and/or the project proponent withdrew the project, leaving us with 80 projects. The high received 147 votes, the low received 13, and with 150 being the max. So it was that one project was the forest management project received the highest votes. So then where we are today, we're bringing the projects to the Planning Commission for your review and consistency determination. Then on Thursday of this week, I'm going back before NCIP. We're going to review the projects, the ranking, and make a formal recommendation to City Council. And then on August 29th, we'll go before Parks and Rec Commission, present the parks-related projects for their review and determination that they're consistent with the Parks and Recreation plan. And then at some point in the fall, we'll present the projects to City Council for approval and funding. Just some information on where we are with funds for NCIP. Currently this year, there will be approximately $12.2 million available for NCIP projects. Staff is recommending 11 million of that 12.2 be made available to fund projects. Right now, that would consist of roughly 35 projects with an additional 4 cutoffs. And just to give us some, we'll call it breathing room, staff reviewed 42 projects for CEQA determination, which is in your packet this afternoon. And I think that's it for me.
So planning staff reviewed the 42 NCIP projects for consistency with the general plan, specific plans, and any applicable area plans, and found them to be consistent. That's in Exhibit A of your packet. Let us know if you have any questions. And that included the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, Move Monterey Multimodal Plan, and Traffic Calming Plans. So out of the 42 NCIP projects, there are 19 projects that were found to be exempt from CEQA. 22 projects require further review, cannot be exempt at this time, and that's usually because they're in the sensitive archaeological area shown in the general plan, and there may be digging involved that we may need an archaeological report before we can move forward. And then there is another project, a forest management and fuel reduction plan, which Reggie was saying got the highest points. An initial study was already prepared and adopted for that project, so that'll be moving forward. Of those projects that were considered exempt, they were found exempt under existing facilities. So they involve repairs, maintenance, minor alterations of existing public structures, involving negligible or no expansion of existing or former use. New construction or conversion of small structures. That involves the construction and location of limited numbers of new small facilities or structures, installation of small equipment and facilities in small structures. And then information collection, where we don't have a project quite yet, but we're still collecting information and trying to determine what the project is. With that, planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending to the City Council that the 2024-25 NCIP projects are consistent with the general plan, any applicable area plans, specific plans, traffic calming plans, and the Move Monterey Multimodal Plan. Public Works is here for questions on particular NCIP project descriptions. Planning staff is here if you have any questions on consistency or CEQA determinations.
Thank you. Are any questions from staff?
Yeah,
Or
just a
staff?
quick question. This is not the rank ordering, is it? In the exempt projects chart, this isn't like number 1, number 2, number 3.
No.
So yes, it is the ranked order.
Oh, okay.
So what you see there, where in Exhibit A, where it says project rank 1, 2, 3, and so on, that would be how the
Oh.
votes were tallied.
Okay. I didn't bring that chart. Sorry.
Any other questions for staff?
Well, as long as you're up there, for the Veterans Park, there was a lot of fencing, thousands of feet of fencing in one of the items. And I'm just curious where
So
is that fencing?
okay, yes. Well, some of it's replacement fencing, and then some of it would be additional new, and it generally runs along the roadway there. I forget the Veterans Drive.
Yeah.
So it parallels Veterans Drive, and it's going to go from kind of the flagpole area down to, there's a restroom. So it would the bocce court, the basketball court, and that restroom area.
I see. Okay. And so a lot of that doesn't have fencing now. So this is sort of a new, is it done for safety then?
So I think it was proposed for a couple different reasons. It was one to prevent the basketballs and other equipment or balls rolling into the street mainly.
Mhm.
So yeah, we could say safety.
Okay. Thank you. That's all.
Mike?
I think you mentioned $12 million is available this year,
Correct, yes.
but only 11. Where's the other million?
So yeah, it's a good question. So about roughly 400,000 was going to go to the contingency account. So that would bring that up to from roughly 800,000 right now to 1.2 million. There's about 450,000 that goes to staff expenses. And then there was, let me see one. So we had I think I have, sorry, give me 1 second. I have a chart. So we had, so that was at 400,000, another 450, that's 850. And then we would hold roughly another 100,000 or so was going to be in the ending balance account. Just because the way the cutoffs on the projects were, we didn't have enough funding to fully fund, say, like one more project. So that's where that $11 million recommendation came in.
Thank you. At a couple of points in the last couple decades, we reached a point where money became a real issue beyond the norm. And we always had an overabundance of projects not finished. Where are we at on even up last year's projects and the previous years since the 2000? We
So
keep getting more projects than we can accomplish. How are we addressing that?
So yes, you're correct. So we're doing a couple of different things. So the answer to your first question, we currently have a backlog of 58 projects with a budget of roughly 11.3 million. Or I'm sorry, 10.3 million. Yes, so 58 projects with a budget about 10.3 million. With this round, we could easily be up to roughly 90 projects with over $20 million in NCIP. So in the past, so in calendar year 2023, we completed 15 projects. To date this year, 2024, we've completed 13 projects. So as I've told members of NCIP committee, we're roughly completing 1 to 2 projects a month. That's kind of where we are right now. And what we're doing is we're also looking at ways to bring in some outside help. Currently, we've identified 11 projects that we've sent to Kimley Horn as an outside consultant to help us to complete. And we're also looking at bringing in some additional staff where we can. But yes, we are limited based on staffing, mainly on the projects and what we can do. So, I mean, we're pushing as hard as we can every day to get projects done.
My last question is, we found over the years that we're being beaten to death by inflation. Do you have a percentage of increase in your cost of your projects over the last couple of years? Percentage wise?
Percentage, I think it's hard to say. I think that different projects have definitely increased, right? The costs for things like materials like asphalt, concrete, steel, those have definitely increased. But then some other projects, I would say that they've maybe held steady. Like we just finished a couple different streetlight projects. I would say under what we expected. So I think it really depends, but I think reasonably in the last, say, 5 years, the prices have probably increased 20 to 25% from where, what I've seen in the records.
That goes along with the rest of the nation. Thanks.
Is there an easy way for the public to access a list of all the projects and the current status of them, where they are, how they're progressing, just so there's way for them to, particularly in the neighborhoods, to know that
Yeah,
their
so
particular interest in a project is that's where it is.
that's that. Yeah, and that's another great question. So what we're doing right now is I've been trying to work on updating the list on. So we have on the city's website, there's an NCIP website. If you go to Public Works, you can access the NCIP website. And we do have a series of lists. What we have right now is the projects that are approved by year. So you can go in there and you can find projects approved in 2022 or 23, 24. And we also have not been as good about updating the list with current progress. But that is one of the things that we're going to work on improving. And we're also looking at finding a way to have a GIS-based map system where people could go in and just click on their, if their neighborhood, if that's what they're interested in, and find projects that way also. So it won't just be list-based, but there should be a map as well.
Outstanding.
Thank you. No more? I guess we could have audience participation at this point. If anyone would like to ask a question of staff or make a comment about the subject at hand, please feel free. Or not.
Let me check online real fast.
See if the mic works.
All right, check 1, 2, 1, 2. All right. Good afternoon. Just Chris Barlow at 940 West Franklin. Wanted to see if the Hartnell Gulch walkway project made the cut. Hopefully it did. That's been something I've been, I think, spearheading for probably the last 8 years. And I think that's one that, I consider shovel ready and a ready improvement for the city. Thanks very much.
Can we get a reply on that? Thank you.
Yes. So unfortunately, it did not. But don't lose hope. Kevin Anderson in our Public Works Department, they're putting together a plan to address some of the, major issues in Hartnell Gulch. So there is work that's coming down the pipeline.
Thank you. No more?
There are no hands raised
No hands
online.
raised? Okay, so why don't we move along to comments and a motion from the club here. Comments?
I think one comment is obvious, is putting the list on an active computer base where residents can tune in and find out what the status is of the project they're interested in, be a huge public relations feather in our cap.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. Mike?
This is the epitome of a successful program. We have the money, we have the projects, we can't get them done. And this is a recurring problem. I'm really glad that Reggie just reported that they're making a really sincere effort to catch up, because when you fall behind in government, it's very hard to catch up. And I appreciate that they're making the effort.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please?
Sure. I'll move to recommend to the city council that the fiscal year 2024-25 Neighborhood and Community Improvement Program, NCIP, is consistent with the general plan, specific plans, area plans, master plans, coastal plans, traffic calming plans, and Move Monterey multimodal plan.
Second.
You second. Mike Brassfield seconds.
Take a vote.
Can we have a roll call?
Sure. Chair Dawson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bluth,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Latassa,
Yes.
and Commissioner Silva.
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries with a vote of 6.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along. We're considering 601 Lighthouse Avenue, variance application VA 24-0019 to allow construction of a roof deck and associated railing exceeding the 35-foot maximum building height. Applicant Chris Barlow.
Chair Dawson, I need to recuse myself on this item.
Sold. So can we have a staff report on this, sir?
Yes, please bear with me for one moment.
So haven't we seen this before a couple times?
Yes. So my name is Chris Schmidt. I'm a senior associate planner for the city. I've been working with the applicant and property owner on this project for some time now. And so what we're looking at today is a variance for the roof deck to a portion of the roof deck to exceed the 35-foot maximum building height in the lighthouse specific planning area. So the staff recommendation is that the planning commission adopt a resolution denying the variance application. And I'll quickly go through some background information since the planning commission has already seen the site before, but here we see the site. It is located on Lighthouse Avenue at the corner of Lighthouse and Hoffman Avenue in New Monterey. And it contains an existing building, which the project is currently under construction. And I'll just note, this is a graphic that I've showed to the planning commission in the past, but I thought it's very important to show, what the surrounding area looks like. So Lighthouse Avenue is a mixed use neighborhood. By plan, there are residential units on Lighthouse as well as, particularly commercial. And if you can imagine where the bay is, it is to this northeast direction. And the New Monterey neighborhood goes up the hill on the left-hand side where we see the multifamily neighborhood in orange. So background. So yes, the Planning Commission did initially see this project back in 2022 in October when the Planning Commission approved the use permit. And then the ARC saw the project a few different times, ultimately deciding on the final approval of architectural review in December of 2023. And then as recently as May of this year, the Planning Commission approved the condominium subdivision map and a use permit amendment for that map. And as I mentioned, the project is currently under construction and has received their building permit. And so just as a reminder, this project was a conversion of an existing building. The building previously contained retail as well as upstairs, the Paper Wing Theater. And it is a conversion project to 5 residential units and 1 commercial unit at the Lighthouse Avenue Street frontage, as well as common area, including the roof deck in question, parking, storage, waste enclosure, mechanical and electrical equipment, elevator, etc. So what are we looking at today? The variance request is to exceed that 35-foot height limit at a portion of the roof deck railing. The railing would be 36 feet, 10 inches above the adjacent grade, which would come out to be 22 inches above that 35-foot height limit. The applicant did provide justification for their variance, which has been attached to the resolution as Exhibit A. And I'll go into the variance findings, including the applicant's justification as well as the staff's position on that finding. But before then, here's the specific portion of the railing in question. So it's essentially the project architect and applicant had identified the portion that exceeds the height limit here. It's just this part highlighted in turquoise. So just to reiterate, anything kind of to the left of where I'm hovering my cursor is legal and approved and is a part of their approved building permit as well. To the right is what they're requesting today. So variance finding number 1, that because of special circumstances or conditions applicable to the subject property, including size, shape, topography, location, or surroundings, strict application of the requirements of the ordinance, the zoning ordinance, deprives such property of privileges enjoyed by other property in the vicinity and under an identical zoning classification. The applicants did provide justification for this finding that denying the variance was result in less than standard open space area, and they did reference a section of the city code. And the staff's response is that there are no special circumstances applicable to the site. The building is existing. The height limit would only prevent a portion of that deck area, and there is actually no minimum open space requirement in Lighthouse specific plan. What was referenced was only applicable to the Garden Road multifamily overlay area. And then again, there are no nearby properties within the Lighthouse specific plan area that have roof out decks that exceed 35 feet. The second finding is that granting the application will not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements in the vicinity of the development site or to the health, safety, or general welfare. The applicant has stated that the project would not be detrimental or injurious as the railing would not block views or have any sort of privacy impacts because it is set back from the building edge by 12 feet. Staff concurs with this. I was able to make this finding. It would not be detrimental or injurious to property or improvements or to the public health, safety, or general welfare. And then the third and final finding is that granting the application is consistent with the purposes of this ordinance, will not constitute a grant of special privilege inconsistent with limitations on other properties in the vicinity and in the same zoning district. The applicant provided a couple of examples on which is a part of Exhibit B to your resolution, showing developed sites within the vicinity, a directly adjacent site to the First Baptist Church, which has a tower that was measured up to 41 feet and 36 foot 3 inches at certain points, as well as the Puerto Villa condominiums, which measure up to 45 feet, 8 and 3/8 inches at the chimneys and 36 feet, 4 inches at the chimney base. Staff's response to this is that the proposal is not consistent with this finding. It's not consistent with the lighthouse specific plan or the development pattern of the lighthouse planning area. And would constitute a special privilege deviating from the limitations that are imposed on those properties within the lighthouse plan area, especially noting that these examples provided are actually not within the specific plan area and are not subject to that same height limit. So with that, staff recommends that the Planning Commission deny the application. I'm available for questions. The project architect is here, as well as the ownership is online as well. So thank you.
Any questions of staff? Bob?
So Chris, the question is just about the guardrail, the fence that's going around the perimeter of the open space area, right? There's
Correct.
nothing else associated with the height other than just that
Correct.
component.
And to follow up on his, it's all, if they backed it up to 15 feet that exceeds the height limit, they could have a smaller deck rail. They could shrink the deck by that amount.
Right. So what the applicant is proposing is a nearly 2,000 square foot deck on the roof. If the variance was denied, it would reduce that size by about 540 square feet. So we're looking at close to 1,450 or 460 square foot deck.
Thanks, Chris. So the approved plans already have a deck up there.
Right.
But they want to make it bigger into this blue area shown on their
Right.
plan. So can you explain the relationship between the front and the side setbacks and this height limit? Because the area, it's basically a front setback issue, I think.
Yeah, so there's no specific setback itself. This is just the elevation where we've measured the height limit. Just because there's a lot of topography at the site, we've measured it from that side elevation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like the 12-foot dimension is not actually a side setback.
No.
That's that's just the dimension to the deck, really, the proposed deck.
Right, that's how far the deck itself is set back from the edge of the building.
Okay. So
Yeah.
if they wanted to, the deck could go closer to Hoffman, I guess.
It could.
Okay. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Mike?
Chris, were those variances that are existing prior to the specific plan?
For the examples that were provided, I don't know. I assume so. Those buildings have been there since before, I think, when this specific plan was adopted in 2014 or 16 or so. They're in completely different zoning districts. They're in the R3 zone. Different standards apply. Yeah.
Okay. Now, looking down from above, the width of that 2x4, is it going to be at the top of that rail? Is it going to be a 2x4 at the top? It just doesn't, I didn't see anything it described it. It just shows the barrier and then, I don't know what's on top. But I was just going to point out that a 2x4 seen from about 100 feet away is about this wide.
That's right.
So you're not going to see much of any blockage. Is that correct?
Right, which is why staff concurred with that second finding. I don't think the staff found that there would be any sort of privacy or view or living environment impact. That's correct.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm just curious, are there any other comparable buildings in the city that are providing a roof deck space that could be similar to this?
Not that I could find.
I'm thinking of that hotel on Del Monte. I mean, it's got a restaurant at the top of it.
Oh, one.
The hotel.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I mean, how does that play in? Because it seems that the way that that is set up would be even more space utilization, given the floor area, than the building we're talking about tonight.
Sure, and just a couple things to remember here is that this staff recommendation is purely based on the height limit. That hotel that you mentioned, well, all hotels in the city are within the VAF zone, which has no height limit. And I'm not sure what the development standards when the structure was built, whenever it was built. But I don't know that that's a legal non-conforming, or I'm not sure. But it's a separate site with different standards.
I got one more.
One more.
One of the things when I was reviewing the plan, if it's going to be an area for gathering use, are we going to be putting barbecues and so forth up on the roof?
It's a good question. So the ARC considered these types of issues, and if I remember correctly, the ARC required a condition that any sort of features that would be located at the roof deck could not exceed the height of the railing, which include furniture, lighting, anything like that. Actually, they may have even prohibited lighting altogether, but landscaping, planter boxes, those types of things. So the ARC did require a condition to limit height for anything on top.
Thank you.
Didn't they have another provision for furniture in the hallways? Seems to me they had something very odd.
Furniture in the hallways?
Yeah,
I don't know.
no, okay, never mind. Is there anyone with a hand up?
Well, I believe the applicant's here as well.
The applicant should look, yeah.
Yeah, we can hear from the applicant.
You have a word with the applicant? Welcome back.
Hello, Chris Barlow again from 940 West Franklin, also a principal at WRD Architects. First off, Chris, thank you very much. Welcome back. This is going to get a little confusing with two Chris's there. So if you want to ask me a question, point at me. If you ask Chris, then no problem. I won't be offended. But just to go back through and I really invite anybody who's happens to be in the Lighthouse area, take a look at what's going on there. The building's really looking pretty sharp. It's got big holes in it, but that's part of the construction process. But new floor decks are going in. I think it's going to be a wonderful addition. I was out there 7 this morning. It's very exciting to be part of. So just to comment real quickly on some of the questions that came through and also take a step back and give a little bit of a bigger picture here. The railing in question isn't going to have a top rail at all. It's actually just going to be probably 1/2 inch tempered glass. So really a lot of this height, and I don't take it personally that staff recommends denial. Staff has to follow the strict limits of the height limit, which is very strict. And that's part of why we're asking for what we feel is a small dispensation for this 22 inches of 1/2 inch glass rail that has the bad luck to be sitting above the height limit. The reason why it's above the height limit has partly to do with the topography of the site. As you're going up Hoffman Street, the street's obviously going up. That angle, that uphill angle is what sets our height limit. The building itself is level, so it's going back into grade. And as you start coming down that same upslope there, that's where our railing falls afoul of the height limit by those 22 inches. I don't want to call them setbacks, but we already have that railings off the perimeter of the building by 12 feet. That was really done partly as we wanted to be sensitive and not have it right on the edge. We wanted to give a little bit of relief. Some of you may remember back before the lighthouse specific plan came in place, there was sort of a workable exception where elements that were set back would be a little higher. We had my firm was lucky enough to work on 230 Lighthouse, which is the epicenter bicycles. That building has a lot of what I'd call little smaller tower features or decorative features. Those are all above the 35-foot height limit that's currently in place. So I think with that, looking back, I'm running into a couple projects, not all of them mine, where I'm noticing very strict application of the height limit is ending up with some, fairly boring buildings. The reason being, with property being so expensive, you set a 35-foot height limit. The logic of development is we build to that envelope. And so the developer is not going to voluntarily add things like gabled roofs, or they're really going to be looking to maximize the return on some very expensive property. I think 581 Scott Street, which is going to come right after me, found themselves in a similar challenge where they were adding to a historic house. A gable form probably would have been maybe a little more compatible, but they, just to get the amount of floor area they needed, ended up being a flat roof addition. So it's something that I'd like the commission to consider a little bit. Again, staff has no flexibility whatsoever. They have to enforce the height limit as it's published. And I definitely don't think I'm, inviting anybody to start down the slippery slope with this small railing. It is glass. I was trying to figure out a way to make it telescope down when it wasn't in use, so it would not run afoul of that 22 inches. But really would appreciate, if we can look at this from the standpoint of what's needed for a pleasant outdoor space that won't be offensive to the neighbors. Again, no trellises, no lighting, all that is subject to review by the Planning Commission in terms of anything that would be added above or on that roof deck. But we really do want this railing because, again, going back to that slope, if we were to just take it back to where it matched up exactly with the height and we're right at 35-foot height limit, that would reduce our roof deck, as was mentioned, almost by half, and it would set it back an additional 50 feet. So your experience of being on that roof deck would be lovely roof deck that runs about half the roof and then suddenly gets truncated and you got regular roofing in front of it. So we'd like to create a more pleasant experience. And with that, if I can, I'd like to turn it over to the owner and contractor, Ethan Hare from Hare Construction. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris.
William Hamilton had his hand raised.
Is Mr. Hare going to phone in?
I have William Hamilton with their hand raised and Ethan Hare with their hand raised.
Yes, both are with the applicant team, so you can unmute either one of them.
William had his hand raised first. I'll go ahead and ask him to unmute.
Was Mr.
Can you
Hare?
hear me, everyone?
Yes.
We can.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Commissioners and staff, thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm William Hamilton with Hare Construction. I'm going to say something you'll all want to hear. I promise to be brief. The vision for the Lighthouse Area Specific Plan is to create livable community and a revitalized destination point on Lighthouse Avenue for residents and visitors. Granting this minor variance in no way prevents the community from achieving that goal, and in fact, nurtures, enhances, and advances that goal. The larger and ARC approved deck achieves so many of the other goals that are listed in there, and many of which that we have already discussed. And as agents of change, we are entrusted by the residents of Monterey to carry those out. The larger deck brings more people to Lighthouse. It brings more energy. It brings more vibrancy. It brings more community. It brings more life. The project as designed brings so many of these good things to this decaying corner of Lighthouse and causes no discernible damage at all. And My relationship with staff is great. I have nothing but deep respect for them. But the only point of opposition seems to be, well, that's what's in the plan. We have to do better than that. Monterey is a cherished and intimate community where one size does not fit all. It deserves better. I respectfully ask that you grant this variance. Thank you.
Any more hands up?
Sure, I'll go ahead and ask Ethan Hare to speak.
Anyone from the audience have a
Ethan
comment?
Hare is going to speak. He's been unmuted.
Always, okay.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, commissioners, for your time and consideration of this project. As I've shared in the past, this is a building that I've grown up with and next to, and I'm very excited about being part of the project and having the opportunity to improve this neighborhood and the city in which I've known my entire life. We are looking for the commission to grant approval of a sliver of railing that is transparent and see-through and does not impact any views from anything that I can see. If it does impact anybody's views, in line of sight, it would be of the adjoining buildings and the used bookstore, possibly the parking structure across Lighthouse from our project. ARC has reviewed and supported this project, the deck and its railing as proposed, and approved it twice. We've thoughtfully taken into consideration the neighborhood and both immediate and further away, and the value that we want to bring to this neighborhood. We've set that deck and a railing back to be considerate to the neighborhood and those around us, as well as to those that may enjoy the deck for their sense of security and practical safety. The deck as designed is proportionate to the building. It mirrors the general footprint of the building, and that's where we've followed keeping a symmetrical path of safety around the outside of the proposed deck. By not granting this variance would be a taking and injuries to the project. It is a condo project. Its success is based on the values that we generate while improving the neighborhood. And by reducing the deck by 20% and the available space for its residents to enjoy will impact the values of each individual residence, the building, and the neighborhood at large. This commission has the authority to approve this variance request, and we humbly submit and request that you do so. Thank you. I'm certainly available for questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hare?
The deck is only open to the residents. It's not open to the public.
That is correct,
Okay.
and restricted by building code.
No más?
Oh, forgive me. I listened to the previous hearing and I believe there was some questions specific to the lighting and the railing. If there still are, I'm happy to speak to those.
Don't think it's a problem. No hands up on the internet?
We can go ahead and remind those how to participate.
Once again, information on participating in this meeting and providing public comment, including remotely by Zoom or telephone, is on this meeting's agenda, which is online at isearchmonterey.org. While there are no hands raised online, I believe there's a public commenter in the chambers. Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Welcome.
Thank you. Jean Rash from the Monterey Vista neighborhood. I appeared at the ARC review of this project with concerns about roof decks. And I am concerned about the expansion of the roof deck and changing the codes. And I urge great caution, and I would support the staff in the denial. It's not the few inches, it's the expansion of the roof deck. And I was reassured after the last ARC hearing that it was way back and it was following all the codes. And so I come with great concern about this. I see this as something that will be encroached upon and set a precedent. And these rooftops are a problem in a lot of areas. When I go to see my brother in Renton, they're now putting on third floors and they're the roof deck. And they're looking down into each other's yards. And I fear that you're setting up a precedent. And I hope you'll take great caution with it. I see this as the next problem. And I think if you set up a precedent and you approve the changes and you don't follow staff, that then the next argument is that you let somebody do it and why can't the next person and the next person and the next person. So I hope you'll hold tough on this. They have a nice project. They're doing a great design. They had the roof deck that I thought they were happy with. And I think they're really pushing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any hands raised? No?
I don't see any additional, well, the owner raised their hand again,
We're in
but
public
I
comment.
don't see any other hands raised.
He only gets one bite. Right? Going to bring it back to the group. Yes, sir.
Given the location and the materials and the function, I think it's really a reasonable request. I don't think that there's a gigantic chance that we're setting a precedent here, given the scope of the project we're talking about, particularly the location. So I really am supportive of the applicant, and I think we should approve it.
Sandy, no, yes.
I'm waiting.
Okay, so it is a great project, and I think the owners and the contractor deserve a lot of credit for taking on this this building. It's so interesting to drive by and see the construction. It's quite an intense steel beams, and there's a lot of stuff to make this building work. So they deserve a lot of credit for that. But the reality of variances in California is that you have to have these three findings. That's every jurisdiction in the state has to come up with these three findings to approve a variance. And that's basically a way of keeping it fair, as one of the people said, that it isn't some sort of arbitrary thing. Oh, it looks okay, but it's just a sliver that's over the required height. I just don't see them meeting this first finding for special circumstance. They haven't demonstrated their explanation of this first finding about special circumstance had to do with another zoning in the city that requires a certain amount of open space per unit. And they were using that as an argument for this variance, but that, I hate to say it, it doesn't apply. It's just, to me, I'm not a lawyer, but this is kind of a legalistic thing where you've got to meet that special circumstance finding, I think, to get a variance. And I just don't see it in this case. And as staff said, the second finding is okay. There's no neighborhood impact, so they are willing to go along with that. The third finding also goes back to the lighthouse plan, and there's a 35-foot, height limit here. So unfortunately, I just don't see how these findings can be provided. Nobody has mentioned what I consider a legitimate finding for that first special circumstance case. So I will probably be voting for the staff recommendation of denial of the variance.
I agree with Senor over here. It's not like the deck is being taken away. It's just smaller. Just coming back a little until it meets the standard.
Mike?
Chris, with this deck and with the one that goes beyond that, no, this one goes beyond. The original, how many square feet was that? I'm looking for some kind of a compromise here.
What was proposed versus what would be the resulting deck.
Correct.
If denied. So it was about a 1,995 square foot deck was proposed. And they would lose 540 square feet without a variance.
Without a variance. So we're still talking about a deck. And that's, I understand that. I was leaning in the direction of granting the variance, but I listened to what my fellow commissioners say, and we're not cutting out a deck. We're just saying it's going to be smaller. So I agree with Sandy and Terry.
Well, I'm in favor of allowing the sliver to occur. And so I'll be voting against the staff.
I mean, if I could follow up, I think if the materials were different, then I could see, that there's gonna be a visual impact. It's gonna be obvious that it's there. It does seem to be in a gray area.
I'm just concerned about the findings.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's up here because we're supposed to try to support the city in terms of coming up with where those variances should get pushed a little bit. And I think I agree with Mike. I think for this particular instance, it's not that big of an impact, but it's a large impact for the people who are going to live in that space. They're going to have more room to utilize that roof. And I don't see how the location and the materials and the function really are going to make a big difference in a way that would set a precedent, which I think would be the thing that I'd be most concerned about. But it is not fitting, it's not conforming, but I mean, are we here to say that that's the only, way that we're going to vote on it is purely by not conforming to that small measurement that's there?
Which is actually our job to tell the difference.
Mr. Chair, I'll be happy to make a motion.
Please do.
Okay, I move to go along with the staff's recommendation on 601 Lighthouse and deny the variance application VA 240019 to allow the construction of a roof deck in this over the 35-foot height limit. Of course, they're allowed to keep the 1,500 square feet of deck that's already approved.
Right.
But my motion is to actually go along with the staff report and deny the variance application.
Second.
Second by, okay, can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Chair Dawson,
No.
Vice Chair Bluth,
No.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
and Commissioner Latassa.
Yes.
Okay, that is approved and the decision is appealable within 10 days to the city council. We have applications online or in the planning office.
Thank you so much. Moving right along. We're going to consider 581 Scott Street, use permit, request for reduced setback incentive for a two-story addition with deck for an H2 designated property. Can we have a staff report, please?
You can, just give me just a moment to get situated. Okay. Thank you, Chair. Levi Hill, Planning Manager for the City of Monterey's Planning Division. I'll be presenting this next item, which is a request for a use permit for a reduced setback incentive for a historic property and to consider the appeal of the HPC's decision to approve historic permit and the
I can
associated.
barely hear you, sir.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Got it. and to consider the appeal of the Historic Preservation Commission's approval of the historic permit and associated historic preservation report. So we'll get into it. So the staff recommendation is that the PC adopt resolutions: 1, approving the use permit application, which is the request for the reduced setback incentive for a 2-story addition with a deck, and to 2, deny the appeal application AP 240150, which would uphold the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission, approval of the historic permit, and adoption of the historic preservation report. So just a little side context here. This slide shows the location of the project site within the city, and then a zoom in image of the aerial photo, which shows the site, which is an irregular lot shape bound by 3 street frontages of Larkin Street, Scott Street, and Van Buren Street. The existing structure fronts on Scott Street with the front door facing Scott. So a little background. The application for this property, an application for a Mills Act contract, was submitted to the Planning Division in July 2023, and it was submitted concurrently with an application for a residential addition in that same time. Staff's direction at the time was to process the Mills Act contract and request for historic rezoning before processing the residential addition to better understand what set of standards the addition should be reviewed under. The property was subsequently rezoned to H2 in November 2023 under the historic significance of the Frank Hellum House of Hellum's Tobacco. And the property did, in fact, receive the approval of the Mills Act contract from City Council in November of 2023, as it qualified as a local historic resource based on California Register Criteria 1 and 2. So the proposed project is a residential addition. It's being processed as a historic permit, given that the property is now designated historic with the H2 zoning. It's a roughly 1,300 square foot addition with 816 square feet on the first floor and 501 square feet on the second floor. And there is an associated deck and balcony as a part of the request. So the site is zoned R3, and the project was reviewed against those R3 development standards. It was found to be consistent with all of the R3 development standards, with the exception of one standard, which is the setback distance required between structures on the site. So the addition is proposed to be 7 feet from an existing accessory structure, where 10 feet is typically required. However, the Monterey City Code does have a provision that allows for an applicant to request a reduced setback under a reduced setback incentive provision that is specifically laid out for historic properties that have received historic designation in order to further historic preservation of structures. Those requests are processed as use permits that are, they receive a recommendation from the HPC, and the Planning Commission is the ultimate decision body for those types of use permits. So this slide shows a larger kind of zoomed out site plan of the proposed project, along with a more close-up zoom. As you see, the proposed addition is sited to the rear of the structure behind the existing house. And then as you see on the image to the right there, you can see the accessory structures that the reduced setback is being requested from. So the next few slides will just show the proposed elevations, both existing and proposed. So this is looking from Scott Street. So this would be the front elevation, and the existing obviously at the top of the screen, with the proposed elevation at the bottom. And this is from the Van Buren frontage, which obviously is it's set back quite a distance from the Van Buren Street frontage. However, this is the that elevation from the side. And again, I'll note that this slide does a good job of showing the addition siting towards the rear of the existing structure. And this is from the opposing side, which which would be technically the Larkin Street frontage. And this would be the rear elevation, both existing and proposed. These are two project renderings that were provided by the applicant, and I did want to use this as a moment to clarify. There was a rendering included as Exhibit A1 in the packet that showed the addition as a darker color scheme. That was actually, that was included as a mistake, but it was, the reason that was there was that was requested by the HPC, and you'll see that here in a moment. It was one of the additional informational items that they had requested at the time. The applicant did provide a rendering of how the addition would look in a darker color scheme. However, I will note that the HPC approved the project as you see here and as proposed by the applicant with the white coloring. So we'll talk a little bit about the what happened at the Historic Preservation Commission meetings. Originally, the project was considered by the HPC on June 13th. There, the HPC ultimately decided to continue the item with a few requests. One was that the story poles be installed at the project site to help better understand the project. And another one was to provide an alternate project rendering showing a darker contrasting color scheme, which is what I was just speaking to. And then the third was through these things to attempt to resolve the conflicts between the applicant prepared historic report and the Page and Turnbull peer review that was also included in your packet. So, so those items were addressed by the applicant. Story poles were installed. They did provide a new project rendering showing how the project could look with a darker color. And then they provided, and with that, there was some concessions that were made post the Page and Turnbull report to address that were made to help address some of the concerns that were raised in that report. There was also a field trip held with the Historic Preservation Commission on July 8th so that some of the commissioners could view the project site and the story poles from the context of the project site. And then the project was once again considered and approved by the HPC at the, I'm sorry, this says June 11th, but it's actually July 11th, 2024 HPC meeting. And it was approved as proposed, as I mentioned, with the white color scheme. So there was, so we'll get into the analysis and the Secretary of Interior standards. There was a historic preservation report that was prepared by architectural historian Meg Clovis, provided by the applicant, and it contained a series of information supportive of the modifications to the Frank Hellum House. That report was peer reviewed by Page and Turnbull, which is a contract historic preservation firm with the city. Page and Turnbull, upon the review of the report, and they prepared their own analysis as a part of that peer review. So essentially you have two complete full historic preservation reports analyzing the proposed addition. The Page and Turnbull report concurred with 8 out of the 10 SOI standards and that it was consistent with those 8 standards. However, the Page and Turnbull report did identify 2 potential inconsistencies with standards 2 and 9. And that's what we'll focus the most of this conversation on, is where those discrepancies were. So starting with Secretary of Interior standard number 2 that was found potentially inconsistent by Page and Turnbull. And here you see the historic character of a property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of the historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. So Page and Turnbull kind of identified 3 areas where they saw potential inconsistencies with this standard. One being that it would alter 3 openings that appear to date within the period of significance. Another would alter the original roof line by replacing a shed roof dormer with a larger gable dormer. And then the third area of inconsistency would be that the project would physically connect new construction with the historic fabric of the original residence. I will note that after the Page and Turnbull report was provided, and then obviously provided to the applicant did make revisions to the design. They revised the plans to retain the existing dormer and eliminate a deck entrance as recommended by the Page and Turnbull report, addressing, I would say, 2 out of the 3 things that are noted here. And then moving on to Secretary of Interior standard number 9, that was also found potentially consistent upon its original review by Page and Turnbull. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. The new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and its environment. So I will note that in the review of this standard, Page and Turnbull did agree that the proposed rear addition would remain visually subordinate to the historic house. However, they did also note that the proposed flat roof and the blocky massing and the amount of fenestration may not be entirely compatible with the character of the existing historic residence with the hip and gable roofs. And they also noted that when viewed from northeast and east along the Scott and Van Buren streets, the proposed addition could introduce a visual contrast in form and materials. And then just to follow up on that, they also noted that the hyphen roof deck and railing may undermine the intent to provide a one-story separation between the existing historic home and the addition, and that the extent of glazing and the size of the openings would be much greater than the proposed addition than the historic house. And again, I'll circle back as it kind of relates to standard 9 as well on the changes and revisions that the applicant did make after receiving that report. The Page and Turnbull report not only analyzed the consistency with the SOI standards, but made a series of recommendations as to how the project could be modified and revised to bring the project into greater consistency with those standards. And this purpose of this slide is to note what changes were made and incorporated based on those Page and Turnbull recommendations. And as you see, the first here is to retain the existing south-facing dormer and omitted the entrance onto the roof deck, which would retain a historical character-defining feature. It reduces the project's impact to the original roof line and the original openings. And then the other revision that they made was that by retaining the sunroom and the hyphen roof deck, they revised the railing material from a cable metal railing to a transparent glass railing to reduce the massing and the impact on the roof line and connection on the hyphen piece of the project. So that's the proposed project and the SOI standards and that analysis. So another part of this project is the historic preservation report aspect. So the Monterey City Code requires essentially that properties that that have applications for a historic permit for historically designated properties have to be accompanied with the adoption of a historic preservation report that analyzes the existing historic structure as well as its consistency with SOI standards for any proposed additions or work to be performed on the house. So yes, as you see here in the second bullet, a historic permit shall only be issued upon the finding that the proposed work is consistent with an adopted historic preservation report. So that report was submitted along with the proposed addition to be reviewed concurrently with by the HPC. And the city code outlines a few the required contents of a historic preservation report, and that's noted here. So it must note which of the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment of historic properties is being proposed, and we already covered that was criterion 1 and 2. It has to include a written description of the historic events connected with the resource, which was included with the applicant's prepared historic preservation report, as well as cover the historic context and interpretive period, which is also addressed in the applicant's provided report. An architectural history of the resource, also provided and addressed in the report. And then a program for preservation of the resource, including a statement of how the proposed program meets the SOI standards for treatment of historic properties. And that was also included, as well as there's a maintenance plan that's attached to the project, the project's Mills Act contract that also covers the maintenance, the long-term preservation of the resource. And now for the use permit component of the project. Monterey Code Section 3876H allows a process to modify those underlying zoning requirements, as we talked about earlier, such as setbacks from existing accessory structures. So as I mentioned earlier, the HPC makes a recommendation and the Planning Commission would make the ultimate approval, as assuming that the findings can be made. We'll get into those. So it's your typical use permit findings that this group has seen before many times, but one is that the proposed use is in accord with the objectives of this chapter and the purposes of the zone. Second is that the proposed use, proposed conditions under which it would be operated or maintained will be consistent with the general plan, would not be detrimental to the public health, safety, or welfare of persons residing or working in or adjacent to the neighborhood of such use. It would not be detrimental to properties or improvements in the vicinity. And then the third is that the proposed use will comply with any specific condition required for that use. And then specific to this section, which is incentives for the preservation of historic properties, there are two additional findings beyond those three that are typical with use permits. And as you see here, 4 is impacts of the use, including traffic and parking, would not be detrimental to the surrounding area. And 5, the additional uses conform to the adopted historic preservation report and are necessary for the preservation of a historic resource or historic interior. And as you can see, the proposed addition does not propose to change any of the uses, and there's not, and it's still going to remain a single-family residence. So staff did not see does not anticipate any impacts to traffic or parking. And the HPC at their July 11th meeting did recommend approval of the reduced setback incentive. So as I mentioned, the HPC was provided with 2 historic preservation reports, essentially. And under the authority of the Monterey City Code, as well as the law of CEQA, the HPC exercised its discretion, taking the information presented into the record and made the findings determining that the project did meet the standards, the SOI standards for rehabilitation. And they did move to approve the historic permit for the 2-story addition with the decks. They adopted the associated historic preservation report and recommended approval of the reduced setback. And then on July 19th, there was an appeal application that was submitted by John Bailey on behalf of the Evans Living Trust. The appeal spoke specifically to the HBC's approval of the historic permit and the adoption of the associated historic preservation report. It did make mention of the use permit. However, the city code does not allow appeals on recommendations. And that, at that point in time, that's what that was, as this body is the approving decider of the use permit. And this slide notes and summarizes the basis of appeal, specifically stating that the setting and landscape features were not taken into consideration, that the proposed use does not maximize retention of distinctive features and materials, that the project does not take into account accessory structures impacted by the project. The Mills Act contract limits development of the site, discrepancies with standards number 2 and 9 of the SOI standards, and discrepancies in the area calculations noted in the 2 historic reports reflected inaccurate analysis. So as far as this, the authority of the appellate body, and which will be the Planning Commission in this instance, the Monterey City Code lays out that the Planning Commission shall consider the record and such additional evidence as may be offered, and shall find whether, in its opinion, error was made. Many of the points that were raised in the appeal were brought up in the conversation at the HBC meeting, so it was taken into consideration in their deliberation and the decision that they made. And so essentially the PC is tasked with determining whether or not the HBC erred in their decision when reviewing this appeal. And with that, we'll get to staff recommendation, and that's that the Planning Commission adopt resolutions approving the use permit application, requesting the reduced setback incentive for a 2-story addition with deck for a H2 designated property, and a resolution denying appeal application AP 240150, upholding the decision of the Historic Preservation Commission, approving historic permit and adoption of the Historic Preservation Report. I'm happy to answer any questions, and we do also have the applicant is here. And then also a representative for the appellate is here as well.
Questions for staff?
Levi, can you go back to the slide that was titled HBC decision or something to that effect, right there? Now it says here that the HBC made findings determining the project met the SOI standards for rehabilitation. Do we have information as to what those findings are?
Sure. So essentially the only findings they had to make were that uh, um, that the project was consistent with Standard 2 and Standard 9 of the Secretary of Interior standards, which I don't have the exact language in front of me, but they did read those into the record at the meeting. And then they also found that the project was exempt from CEQA as under 15303 section, construction of small structures.
Well, that's where I'm getting at is this standard number 2 and number 9, because the Page and Turnbull report indicates that they felt, in their opinion, that the project did not comply with 2 and 9, and yet the HBC disagreed. And I'm just trying to figure out where the HBC was in making that determination, given the fact that the qualified historian presented it as being inconsistent.
Yeah, so I think what aided them in that decision was that a separate qualified historian was able to make an argument that the project was consistent with those two standards, both standards 2 and 9. And I believe that person is here with the applicant who can probably shed some light on that as well.
Could you go back to a slide that shows what 2 and 9 were, how they read exactly?
Of course. So start with 2. So it's that the historic character of the property shall be retained and preserved, and the removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize the property shall be avoided. And then we can take a look at 9 whenever you're
Look
ready.
at 9.
Yeah. So you can see from the wording of both of these, and if you're familiar with Secretary of Interior standards, historic preservation in general, it can be somewhat subjective. So
Yeah, the subjective part in this one is the word compatible. And that always throws everybody off, because somebody could have a completely different interpretation as to what is compatible.
two experts may have a completely different interpretation of what's compatible.
Right.
So I would agree.
But number 2 didn't have such a subjective criteria. This is all just shall this and shall that.
Yeah,
But
I think the subjective nature
even
of
if number 9 was subject to debate, which apparently it was, I'm zeroing in on number 2 as being the one that really isn't discretionary. It's either this or that. And maybe we can get the expert to chime in on this, just
Absolutely.
to clarify how the decision-making process evolved, whereas the HPC decided to approve this.
Sure.
If the appeal had not been made, the PC, the Planning Commission, would still be required to ratify or deny the project, right?
The use permit component, yes.
Only the use.
Only the use permit component typically
So
would
the only
be.
reason that we are engaged, and this is not a de novo, right? We are not starting from scratch.
It is under the appeal, it is a de novo, so it is, yes. But under a typical circumstance, you would be correct, it would not be a de novo hearing, and that you would only, your purview would be limited to that of just the use permit.
Thank you.
Sure.
Jerry?
So just regarding the process, then, the city, code says that the projects like this go to the HPC. The 2-story addition to a house goes to the HPC for approval. It doesn't go to the architectural committee.
Yeah, so as I noted earlier, so they actually applied for the Millsack contract about the same time that they did the residential addition. So we kind of pressed pause on the residential addition because, as you're alluding to, the decision of whether or not it's historic is exactly that, which hearing body will actually review, make the decision on the addition based on whether or not it's a historic resource or not.
I see. So it's the mill status that
and the
triggers.
and the historic H2 zoning that gets applied
Right,
to that
okay.
process.
So a couple of other questions. In this case, then the planning commission is it's a typical appeal sort of regarding the HPC approval. We're basically trying to decide whether the HPC erred in its decision. That's the term that everybody always uses.
That's correct.
Okay. And is it possible in our, deciding on this item that the reduced setback incentive could be maintained, but that we differ from the HPC part of the approval? Could there be, are there two different sort of areas of decision there?
Yeah, as Sandy, as Commissioner Freeman mentioned, it's a de novo under the appeal, so it's kind of all open to the Planning Commission.
Okay. And then getting into specifics, we didn't, I guess we could have gone on our own research and trying to listen to HPC hearings, but we didn't have all those minutes or anything. I didn't see them, at least in our materials. Was there any discussion at HPC about the basic architectural compatibility issue of the boxiness issue of the existing house has these sort of sloping roofs, the addition is a boxy mass?
There definitely was a lengthy conversation about the massing of the proposed addition and the compatibility. If you're familiar with historic preservation, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, subjectivity, a feeling of how it should be distinctively not historic versus how it should still be compatible with the historic structure. So there's quite a lot of conversation regarding that. Ultimately, the HBC decided that it did a good job of separating the two from the historic structure and the proposed addition, and also felt that the hyphen was successful and still adjoining the two structures without creating a competing elements to the site.
And then finally, I saw somewhere that the addition is going to have or is proposed to have metal windows. What kind of windows are being proposed?
I believe they're a aluminum type of window.
Aluminum windows. And was that a point of discussion at HPC?
It was brought up, but was ultimately was not flagged as a major issue or concern by any of the members. I believe the applicant architect was able to speak more specifically to the windows and the choosing of the windows. It did come up at one point. But.
Okay. Are they, not to get too fine grained here, but in the business, there are aluminum clad wood windows, and then there are aluminum windows. They're quite different looking things. Do you remember what kind of, are they just metal windows, aluminum, or are they?
They're a specific type. I'll defer to the applicant. I don't want to get it wrong. I'm sure they can definitely answer that. But I do recall there's a specific model or spec for them. Yep.
Thanks.
Mike?
So far, I'm leaning on 2 and 9.
Yeah.
Beyond, was there any feedback from, and we'll hear it from him, but in working with the client, was there any feedback on the issue of the metal clad windows and the structure and possible modifications with staff?
I believe, I'm not sure I understand your question. When you say the client, do you mean the applicant?
Well,
Just want to make sure
they're outlined in 2 and 9. I'm having visual problems. Typically in a Mills project, I look at what was there and then I look at what they're proposing and go from there. And that's why I said, when I read 2 and 9, it filled right in. So I'm asking though, when the historic was addressing some of these issues, was there any feedback from the client with staff about what possible changes to some of those issues?
Certainly. So as I mentioned, staff worked with the applicant to get the project to a point, and then and then we had it peer reviewed based on along with the plans and the report by Page and Turnbull. Out of that, there were some recommendations that were made. The applicant did make a few of those recommendations to bring the project closer into conformance. But beyond that, there were no further revisions made.
Thank you.
I'm looking at the analysis again of Secretary of Interior Standards and at Secretary of Interior Standard number 2. And at the bottom, it says, note, the applicant revised the plans to retain the existing dormer and eliminate the deck entrance as recommended, addressing some concerns identified in this portion of the P&T review. Does that solve all the problems, or is that leave a problem hanging?
So again, nothing's really concrete when even with the Page and Turnbull review. It's a series of recommendations, and they're saying, with these revisions, the project could be found to be consistent with these Secretary of Interior standards. So specifically listed in their review of standard number 2, they did make these 3 notes about the openings that are going to be altered, how the original roof line will be affected by the proposed change to the dormer, and then how the project is physically connected to the existing house. I would say, based on the changes, and I can show you an elevation, that the first 2 of those bullet points were addressed with the changes, and that was that they eliminated that opening onto the roof deck and maintained the existing dormer. So I'd say bullets 1 and 2 here are addressed with that revision. I think where they're obviously making a third note here that the proposed addition is actually attached to the original residence. It is still attached, but utilizing a 1-story hyphen. So I'll go back to the elevations, and it may help kind of show that a little bit better. So as you see on the lower image here, originally this was to be changed. This existing dormer was going to be changed, and that was going to be a door access onto this roof deck and be replaced with a shed dormer. Based on the recommendations from the Page and Turnbull report, the applicant revised the design to maintain the existing dormer as is, eliminate the opening. So right there is those first two bullet points they noted in number 2. And then, as you see, it is still connected with the hyphen, but with the transparent glass, it kind of maintains that existing roof line. So again, I think it's subjective as to whether or not that fully addresses the concerns raised. And again, those are concerns again from the subjective review of an expert.
Levi, could you go back to the analysis slide? The third bullet point, which refers to the physical connection. I'm just curious. It seems to me that I understand why they're saying that, but how would you go about doing any kind of a addition on an historic structure without doing this?
Yes, staff would agree with that remark. I think that the alternative would be to do a detached type of structure. So I think that's what Page and Turnbull is alluding to here, rather than addition. A detached structure could be an option. But I would agree, if you're proposing an addition to an existing structure, it's going to be physically attached.
Right. And so, but the Secretary of Interior Standards does not categorically prohibit attached alterations. They don't say you can't do it.
Correct.
And to follow up on Peter's question, this can be considered an annex to a structure, can it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's so the addition will not be, considered historic. Obviously, it's not going to date from the period of significance. But yes, as Commissioner Silva mentioned, the Secretary of Interior Standards do not prohibit additions to existing historic structures. Just outlines a series of guidance and guidelines for how that can be done while maintaining the historic character.
Are these guidelines or are these standards?
So there's standards, but then there's bulletins that kind of guide or guidelines as to how you can create projects that are in compliance or consistent with those standards. And I'm sure the architectural historian that's here can speak to that much more intelligently than I can.
Thank you.
Of course.
Terry?
I have just one last one. The adjoining properties and the impacts, neighborhood impacts, basically on views or privacy, are they part of our review, or is it not considered part of this review?
No, it's not. So there's no findings to be made, and as it relates to views from private properties, it's a historic permit. The requirements, as I noted earlier, the project conforms to all the R3 standards with the exception of the setback reduction that's allowed to be requested for under the municipal code. So you're correct. It's not like I think you're probably possibly used to seeing findings that you see at our ARC meeting that specifically touches on impacts to views, and that is not the case with a historic permit. It's simply the Secretary of Interior standards rather than those ARC findings you're used to seeing.
Thanks.
Of course.
But following up on what Terry just said, if you step away from all the HPCs and go back to the use permit, weren't there a couple of findings related to public health, safety, and welfare?
There are. Staff does not typically consider views as a parameter of public health, safety, and welfare.
Okay. Is there an applicant in the audience?
We do have an applicant here and some representatives that believe the applicant's architect, as well as the architectural historian is here. And then we also will hear from the appellant. Typically, we allow for 10 minutes for both the applicant and then 10 minutes for the appellant. But obviously, that's to the discretion of the chair.
Welcome.
And did not the commission also ask for Meg, the historian, to say something as well?
Yeah, she's here with us, part of the applicant team, so she's welcome to speak.
All right.
Hi, my name is Liam O'Brien, the applicant, along with David McLaughlin and Helena McLaughlin. I think Levi summarized everything pretty well from start to finish and where we are today. We did have two very long meetings with the HPC, 2 hours and 2 hours and 15 minutes. So it was a grueling process. And I think we came to a great resolution with our concessions. And I think it'll be a great project. And I know a lot of you were out there yesterday. In my opinion, I don't think the story polls do it any justice. But I'm going to let John, the architect, speak to all of that. And Meg is here to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. So questions about standards 2 and 9. So I'm going to go through those. And first, standard 2 has to do with historic character of the historic portion of the house. That's the Frank Hellam house. That's in the front property. And so standard 2 says the historic character of the property shall be retained and preserved. The removal of historic materials or alteration of features and spaces that characterize a property shall be avoided. So Page and Turnbull had a problem with 3 openings. The first one was the door on the south part of the west facade, but that door was not part within the period of significance. According to Richard Hellam, that door was put in the 1970s. So it's not a historic part of the house. The other one that you heard was the dormer, and that was going to be changed, but that's been taken off the table and it's not going to be changed. The roof line's not going to be changed, so that won't be touched. The third is the window on the south part of the east facade, and that will become an interior door. I don't know, do we have the side elevation? So the other side. Okay, so on the top drawing, it's the window that's on the far left, very far left. That one.
That one.
That one, yes. And according to the Secretary of Interior's guidelines, this is in secondary elevation, and in order to have rehabilitation possibilities, secondary elevations can be changed. So I think this is what the HPC saw. It's not 3 openings, it's only 1 opening that's going to be changed. And so really there's not a lot of historic fabric that's going to be removed. The rear, there was at one point in time a rear addition, which you did not see yesterday because it was built in, I think in the 60s, and it has been removed. It was like a washroom. And then the hyphen connector is going to be placed where you saw the back door yesterday. And this hyphen connector is a common preservation solution. It's in Preservation Bulletin 14, which is one of the bulletins that help people apply the standards and guidelines. So Bulletin 14 is specifically on how to attach an addition to how to attach addition to a historic building. You use these hyphen connectors, they're called. So we are losing 1 opening, but we're not 3, and then the hyphen connector will be utilized. So for standard 9, this was, I'll read it again so everybody can know what we're talking about. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction shall not destroy historic materials that characterize the property. So we already went over that in standard 2, that there's 1 window that's going to be changed. And then that any new work shall be differentiated from the old and shall be compatible with the massing, size, scale, and architectural features to protect the historic integrity of the property and environment. In the same bulletin, Bulletin 14, it does state that any type of architectural style but can be used for an addition. They just don't want it to match. So this is a little Queen Anne cottage. They didn't want, according to the standards, if what was proposed was a Queen Anne addition, that would be not compatible with the standards. But contemporary additions are considered okay. Now, with standard 9, Page and Turnbull agreed that the addition was visually subordinate, had simple massing, it was differentiated, and used compatible siding. They did not like the metal railing on the hyphen deck. And so what they had proposed was that glass, transparent glass railing, which is now being used. Page and Turnbull also stated that the addition is set sufficiently to the rear and that its proposed massing would not have a detrimental effect. So the standards and guidelines and Bulletin 14, which explains them, does recommend that the best place for an addition is at the rear of a property if there's enough room for it. And in this case, there was enough room. Had to be shifted a little bit because to save a tree, which John Skorkas, the architect, can talk about if the siting, if you have questions along those lines. So one of their comments was that there was too much glazing, too many windows. And Mr. Skorkas can tell you why there's going to be that much glazing, but also in Bulletin 14, how to handle that hyphen. It states that generally glass may be the most appropriate for small scale additions, such as a connector between an addition and a historic building. And if you'll see that connector is a glass historic connector. So it does meet the standards and guidelines. So I hope that wasn't as clear as mud, but if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So with there only being 3 minutes left, if John wants to speak, we may let John speak and then we can.
Well, I do have one question. On the original building, how many square feet was that? Can tell you're adding 13 something? Thank you.
Can I ask Meg about the windows?
Sure.
Oh, that's a John question.
Oh, that's a John question. Okay.
That's a John question.
Good evening. My name's John Skorkas. I'm the architect. And to give you a point of reference, I'm Chair of the Historic Resources Review Board for the County of Monterey, which is advisory to the Planning Commission. So I've been on that board for 20 years, so I'm on both sides of the story here. So quickly to give you a reference, you could use any style. For the addition, we went back and forth. We have a height limit. We wanted to keep it below the ridge of the existing building. So that kind of determined where we wanted to play with the height of the building, keep it subordinate. What happens is the program that the clients wanted required 2 stories. And we determined what the footprint was behind the building and between some accessory structures. And right now there's 5 structures on the building, on the property. 3 are considered historic. 2 are, we consider them significant, but they're not historic. So that could essentially be torn down. So what we chose to do is preserve the 3 historic and actually preserve and renovate the 2, or keep the same use as the 2 and not incorporate them into the building. Keep those 2 auxiliary structures. So that kind of determined our footprint and our height. When you talk about looking at the different roof pitches, we've got 6 different roof pitches. So, picking out a roof pitch or design did not find something compatible within those. And as a point of reference as well, the building is not historic. The architecture is not historic. So it's, what do you play against when you're trying to do a remodel or an addition? So there's nothing within the existing building or patterns that was predominant to follow. So we chose the contemporary style. Flat roof, kept it. We couldn't provide a roof pitch because of the height limit. And once again, there wasn't a roof pitch or something that would even complement what was there. So basically, we're looking at the new addition as being complement to the 5 structures that are there. So you understand that the site and what was on the site, and kind of a complement the new structure, so people can go onto the site, see what's part of the historic component, and be complemented by the new architecture. With the windows, we looked at metal clad, aluminum clad, and aluminum, and we brought them out to the site, and the exterior profile is essentially the same. It's the interior that changes with the wood clad. So side by side, you couldn't even tell the difference between the 2. And so that's why we chose to go with the metal thinner profile window.
For me,
So, I guess, is there any questions?
yeah, ignore that.
So if you have any questions.
More questions?
Yeah, I didn't understand about the windows. So obviously the existing windows in the old house are wood sash windows.
Right.
Like these.
Right.
And what are you proposing for the addition for the windows?
Aluminum windows.
And what are they, not aluminum clad, but aluminum, do you have a manufacturer picked out?
We were looking at Weather Shield,
Okay.
and we
So
had
they're-
a sample on site,
Okay.
and we had the clad next to the just straight aluminum,
Uh-huh.
and the exterior profiles were almost identical.
Oh, so they are clad.
No, we're not using the clad.
Okay, but they're,
But
they're,
the difference was on the interior of the profile of the window.
okay.
So on the wood clad, the interior was wood and a bigger profile, but the exterior profile was pretty much identical.
Okay, thank you.
And then part of the amount of glazing was transparency. Transparency kind of lightened up the structure. We went to a spiral stair to minimize footprint of the stairway that went up. So that tower is essentially glass. So it minimized the massing of that structure and kind of lightened it up and gave it that transparency. So when you look at the existing versus the proposed, it became a lighter structure and a less dominant structure.
Okay. And then the appellant is making a case about a change in square footage calculation.
What happened was, the plans were developed and they went out to both historians. And so the plan was there. There was a question on one of the calculations, and I went back and redid the calculations, and there was an error on my part on the calculation, but there was not an error on the footprint of the floor plan. So when both historians saw the footprint, it was identical to what you see up there.
Mhm. Nope. Mike?
You mentioned, I believe, that it's not the structure that is historic.
Of the existing, yes.
I'm sorry?
The architecture is not historic on it.
So it's not the builder?
No,
Then what is it that you're done
it's the
documentation?
association with,
Sorry?
it's the association with Frank Hellum.
Okay.
So the architecture itself is not what's historic.
In the illustrations, it shows on the front house a fireplace. I first watched that building in the early 60s, 1960s. I'll be clarifying, not 1860s. And I recall that fireplace being taller.
It had I think a metal chimney that was added on top. Is that- Yeah, it was just a metal component on top.
So, because I remember it being above the roof line, that's why
The brick structure is the same, but I think there was like a metal, wasn't there a metal extension on it? Yeah, there's like a metal shroud that they took off and they actually redid the fireplace.
That's it. Is there anyone from the internet got a hand up?
So we'll hear from that appellant first
Okay.
before moving into public comment. If there's no further questions for the applicant team, for John or Meg.
Yeah, I have no questions.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Thank you, John.
Great. We'll welcome the appellant up here to the podium to speak.
Evening, Chair Dawson,
Oh, yeah.
members of the Planning Commission. My name is John Bailey. I'm here representing the appellant. Jake and Kimmy Evans, they're trustees of the Evans Living Trust. Going to talk to you very briefly, and then I'm going to let Jake and Kimmy come up, and then I'm going to let Joel Panzer come up. He's our planning consultant to talk a little bit about CEQA and the setbacks. So I'm going to have my clients, Jake and Kimmy, come up first.
Good afternoon. Jake Evans, my wife Kim behind me. We bought 211 Larkin 25 years ago. It's our first house in Monterey. It's a family house meant to stay in the family. My grandmother lives up the street, had the house for about 75 years. And when we bought our house, we knew that it was probably the smallest house on the block. Big redwood trees next to us on Mr. Helm's property or the applicant's property, and then pretty massive home to the right of us. And the saving grace was the rear yard and looking at this historic property, especially the barns. So there was always concerns that if we had building right on top of us, the house would now be sitting in a hole with very little light. So we opposed this massive structure. Definitely opposed the setback. It may not seem like a lot, but 3 additional feet. As you can see with this view looking right back into our home of the kitchen and the master bedroom through the crystal walkway, any distance is helpful from a privacy standpoint and a light standpoint. So I'm not anti-development. The folks have a beautiful property, but to push it so much and put our property in a hole is we oppose of that. We have some other folks here, happy to answer anything, but thank you very much for your consideration.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Joel Panzer. I attended the Historic Preservation Commission meeting in July and represented Mr. Bailey, who was out of the country at that time. I've got some comments here and I'll give a copy to the planning manager for the file. So with the CEQA guidelines, it's really a substantial, the determination to be made on the use permit, as I see it, is, and the development itself is, will there be a substantial adverse change in the significance of the historical resource? And then CEQA guidelines section 15064.5B3 talks about a project that follows the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties with guidelines for preserving, rehabilitating, and restoring. It talks about that in the context. So I see it as a 2-part test. You've got the standards And then you've got the guidelines, and all the evidence in the record and the testimony has been focused on the Helm House versus the property itself. And in the entirety of the property is in the H2. Under the Mills Act, they could have opted just to put the house in there, and then this wouldn't be a topic of conversation. So under the standards for treatment of properties, there's a lot of criteria, and it talks about a historic building or building structures and associated landscape features and their relationships should be considered. A design that maximizes retention of spaces and spatial relationships. Historic buildings, structures for a legally defined parcel of land, historic character of the property to be retained and preserved, alterations of feature spaces and spatial relationships characterize a property will be avoided. And that, I think, is the crux of our concern today. The site characteristics in the February 2024 Clovis report just mentions site characteristics, but then goes into the whole discussion about rehabilitation. You heard some of that today. Page and Turnbull did the same thing. They talked about the criteria in the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of properties, but there's no discussion of spatial relationships. So I think there's a fair argument to be made here that without that analysis, you could say that this house, particularly with the setback that's being requested, the variance, and it's not called variance, but what's being requested today, could further impact those spatial relationships and the association of the property with Mr. Helm during the period of significance. So the lead agency in this case is also, if you happen to agree with that point of view, has to determine, are there potentially feasible measures to mitigate the impacts? Under your code, the municipal code section 38-72 for historic properties, it talks about the purpose of being to enhance and preserve the setting of historic resources. Under the H2 zoning, as I mentioned, it's the historic resource which is identified as a property in the Mills Act contract. The accessory structures you're pushing closer into now, you're going, I think, up to 7 feet. So you completely lose that spatial relationship, and the property itself is 0.6 acres in size. So there's other options that could be considered. I would also then say that with respect to the plans, there's a set of plans from June 30th, 2023 that have statistical information on them. The Clovis reports mimics that. The February 2024 mimics those square footages. There was a set of plans which is in the packet today, April 17th, 2024. And by my calculations, the plans get larger by about 19%. And maybe that's due to a miscalculation of square footages. I guess the other concern is that with the issues raised by Page and Turnbull, because the inclination before the Historic Resources Board by staff was to deny it, they never routed that back out either to Ms. Clovis to re-review for, is it more consistent or is it further away from consistency if the upper floor got larger, the lower floor got larger, and the decks got larger. So I think that's a point of consideration. So without additional commentary from a qualified professional on those points, on the standards versus the guidelines, or vice versa, and on the size of the home, I think I'd ask the commission to either defer the application to get better information in the record that would support the current staff recommendation as it relates to CEQA, or redesign or something else. Again, it's a fairly large property. So I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. So to sum up, we're talking about substantial evidence. We're talking about the historic preservation reports. There's 2 historic preservation reports. There's the one that was completed by Meg Clovis. There's the one that was completed by Page and Turnbull. Page and Turnbull said the last time they saw the project, however, as designed, the proposed project would not comply with standards 2 and 9 of the Secretary of Interior. So that's an absolute no as far as they're concerned. It's not gone back to Page and Turnbull. There's no finding by Page and Turnbull that it complies with Secretary of Interior Standards 2 and 9. Then Meg Clovis's, you have in her report completely different square footages. You've got 1,088 square feet. The architect says it was a miscalculation. There's nothing in the record that shows it was a miscalculation. There's nothing in the report. And the report itself, if you look in the last page of Exhibit B, it actually lists Page and Turnbull's attachments, their addendum. It lists a February 14th landscape survey. How is a February 2nd report citing a February 14th landscape survey? So do look at that page 48, package page 99, last page of Exhibit B. You'll see that it's actually not from Meg Clovis's report. It's from the Page and Turnbull report. We're available for questions. Thank you.
Questions, y'all? No? No? Are there more applicants?
I believe that's all from the appellant side. So we can close that portion and then open it up for public comment if there's no questions. Not seeing any.
No.
No.
Okay,
All right,
so
we can open up for public comment.
let's open it up for public comment. Jean, first up.
Hi, Jean Resch, Monterey Vista. I was here for NCIP, but this got really interesting, and I had been at the ARC one before. I'm always concerned when there's requests for variances and exceptions that impact a neighbor so adversely. And we take hours and hours, hundreds of hours, getting our codes, getting our general plans, getting our specific plans. We get the community together, we get neighbors together, we compromise, we spend a lot of time on this. And I'm always concerned when exceptions are requested, and yet somebody like the Evans family are so impacted. And I think it has to go to the appellant. You have to protect the average property owner that is subject to a lot of this development. And when I look at that, I go, if the changes are not historic, I guess they are admitting that. Why are we giving tax exemptions, mills exemptions for something that's not even maintaining any of the history? There's that bulky add-on that it's kind of ugly. And now they want to go back to this setback that impacts this rather innocent family when they've got 0.6 acres of options. I go with the appellant.
Any hands raised?
Can we just remind everyone how to participate as well?
Sure. Once again, information on participating in this meeting can be found at isearchmonterey.org. Today's PC webinar ID is 161-990-8039. There are 3 attendees online. However, I do not see any hands raised.
Should we give them a minute? 60-second New York minute?
Sure.
Give them a few
Actually, one
seconds.
attendee dropped off. So there's 2 attendees and no hands are raised.
Okay,
That might be our cue to close the public hearing.
yeah, let's close the public comment portion of this and come back to the group. Peter,
Well, there's a lot to unpack here.
yeah,
So maybe we can do it systematically. I want to make comments regarding the Secretary of Interior Standards 2 and 9 first, and then I'll jump into the use permit second. If you could go back to those slides.
that one, yeah.
So number 2, we know that with the revisions to the plans, the first 2 bullet points have been resolved. The last bullet point is the one that I'm stuck on because obviously it would suggest that you can't do this, but there's nothing that categorically prohibits in addition. The question is, did the HPC err in making a decision regarding this? And I would say that they did not err because it's ambiguous to me. Now, on number 9, if we can go to number 9, the key word here is compatible, which is a entirely subjective phrase. And I don't believe it's possible to suggest that a lower commission made an error in judgment by using their subjectivity. That if it was objective and they clearly made a wrong binary decision, that would be easy to disprove. But this, when you're using a word compatible and it's entirely subjective, that they're allowed to do that. So I don't think they erred in number 9. And regarding the use permit, even though the findings may have been satisfied, which staff indicated that they were, I'm still troubled by the fact that we have impacts to neighbors. And I'm not in support of the use permit. I think that if we want to proceed with this project, we should just stick with the zoning setbacks and not allow the neighbors to be adversely impacted. So that's where I stand.
Yeah, this is difficult because it's the subject parcel is over a half an acre. And here they're squeezing this whole addition. It's not that big, it's 1,300 square feet, but they're squeezing it into this whole southwest corner of the lot, right up against this neighbor. So it seems like, I mean, I agree partially with Peter's excellent analysis. I guess I am troubled by the setback issue because it is impacting a neighbor pretty severely. If you go to the site and walk around, you can see that you know that existing neighbor is going to be impacted by this project. And then going back to the actual Secretary of Interior standards, I don't know. My review of these plans and this addition, I just don't see how it's compatible. I don't quite understand how the HPC arrived at their conclusion that this addition is compatible in any way with the existing house. I guess, you know, it does use wood siding, but it's so blocky and massive. It definitely differentiates from the existing, but it's
I was going to say that it differentiates.
it differentiates. They got that part,
Big
but
time.
the boy, the architecture of it being so contemporary, you know, just attached to the existing house. I'm troubled by the compatibility, even though it is a subjective word. We are de novo and we get to consider what we think compatible is. So to me, number 9, as Page and Turnbull said in their report, it's blocky and contemporary looking, and I have a compatibility issue with that.
Yeah, it says compatible twice.
Okay. I'm going to start with something that has happened in the past when something has come to the Planning Commission from the Historic Preservation Committee. And people who are on the Historic Preservation Committee have been trained in looking at Secretary of the Interior standards. This is really what they do for being on the committee. And there have been instances where the Planning Commission has taken upon themselves to decide whether the HPC was correct or not. And in one instance, we decided that the HPC had erred, and that caused a real internal turmoil, I think, amongst committees because they felt that their training had not been respected. Their decision had not been respected. And so I want to start from saying that I think that what the Historic Preservation Commission decided should be respected, in my view. And so for that reason, I'm going to support the staff's recommendation to both approve the use permit and deny the appeal. One of the things about the use permit is that as a beneficiary in my own property of having an additional structure too close to the property line so that it remained as far away from the historic structure as possible, I can see why closing the gap between the auxiliary structures and the proposed addition is the variance, that it should be closer rather than pushing it 10 feet. Because they are auxiliary structures, they could also be torn down. And the new addition to the house, the annex, if you will, would still be as high as it is and still impact the neighbor behind them. So I'm not sure that the distance between the new addition and the existing auxiliary structures would have more or less impact on the neighbor if the 10-foot requirement were upheld. And then the last thing I'm going to say is I am so impressed by these folks to maintain a historic site, if you will, with all of its 5 buildings and to improve the site massively from what it was before. I grew up a block from the Los Angeles County Arboretum, where in a certain point in time, there were so many structures and it was so loose that there was no organization to it. And in its final iteration, the part that was historic, the buildings, the Queen Anne Cottage, the barn and tack room, the Hugo Reed adobe were all maintained as part of this historic site. And these people are willing to maintain and improve all 5 buildings on this historic site. And I really think that that should be applauded. So these are my reasons for going with the staff recommendation.
Yeah, I think I agree with both Peter and Sandy. But I think where my biggest concern is with the use permit. I mean, I am concerned that the neighbor is being impacted to such a degree. Now, given the way that I understand how the historic preservation process works, from having gone through that myself for our home,
Yeah.
I mean, you want to have the modifications to the roof. You want to try to protect as much of the historic structure as possible. And you want to make sure that when people are coming to the property, they know what the historic structure is. And they're not going to make a mistake in terms of observing the addition and then having that as a component that they're somehow misinterpreting as part of the house. That's certainly not going to happen with this. I mean, the way that the design has been put forward, it's clearly a different architectural style, and it's not going to be confused. And I agree with what Sandy was saying. I mean, it's great to see that lot and that home improved. I mean, it was definitely an historic part of Monterey, but it was definitely in a very bad state of repair until they got it. So, I mean, I'm kind of conflicted. I agree with what Peter was saying and with Sandy, but I'm not sure how to work at that difference between trying to make sure that what HBC was trying to accomplish with their approvals is not going to also have a detrimental impact on the neighbor. So when we, have a complete discussion, I think that's what we really need to figure out. Is how do we take what Peter was saying.
We need to vote on each item separately.
Yeah, then I think, then we could work it out that way. But I think it's going to impact their design and everything too. So.
Mike?
I agree with Sandy. This is more thoughtful process than the others. I first approved of this house when I was in high school because I thought it was a very well built and good looking house. It was one of those things of maybe in the future I need to look at something like this. So I've kept an eye on it all these years. I was sorry to see that it started breaking down. But looking at the material given to us, like I said, I look at the diagrams first and the images. And it's like Terry said, it just, the cities now are being told by the state that we must be more objective versus subjective. So trying to break down a visual image into subjective and it is really difficult to make it objective. But I think I agree with Peter and Terry. When you look at this, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, I have a thought in my mind that when new towns were plopped down, they built false fronts and then put sometimes tents and sometimes other type of construction behind it. So you had a visual image of the property from the front. That's what I think we're seeing here. In compliance with the Mills Act, we're seeing the old construction here as the image. And behind it, it's like, what is that? And I agree with Sandy's phrase of it's an annex. And it just does not compute, to use an old television phrase. There's a third alternative. Just deny both of them and have them go back and look at it again. I'm not suggesting that that is the right answer. It just, the variance of 3 feet, we have other variance and reductions now to 4 feet. Well, we still have 7. But it doesn't make sense when you're talking about second stories looking down. So I have to agree that I'm against that part. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, I agree with Sandy that this is I think it's too complicated for me at this point. I'd rather see something simple and basic. With that, you have no more comments?
So I was just going to interject here, given that this has come up as part of the conversation amongst the commission and regarding to the use permit component. And I think that Commissioner Silva has a great idea that should probably just make a motion and vote on each one individually. But as it pertains to that use permit and those accessory structures, it is noted in the Page and Turnbull report that neither the washroom nor the tack room are historically significant. So too, I believe it was Commissioner Freeman that made a comment earlier that the option to remove those structures is there, which would alleviate the need for the use permit and would not really impact the design of the project any further if the applicant chose to go that avenue. So I just think that's something that's pertinent and worth taking into consideration in making your decision in regards to that.
That would do away with the variance.
Well, I can't say with certainty that that's an option the applicant would explore, but it is certainly an option that is there. And that would, if they chose to remove those structures that are not protected or not deemed historically significant, that would remove the need for the use permit without any other changes to the proposed project.
I want to make one other comment. By taking those structures away, it isn't going to reduce the view impact on the neighbor because the addition is the thing that is causing the problem. The auxiliary structures are tiny.
But it could be moved.
It could be moved.
Yeah.
It could be moved.
That'd be a difficult move.
Can we do a tally? Let's do one at a time and start with the use permit. And I'm going to make a motion to deny the use permit.
I'll second.
So
We have a motion and a second. Can we get a roll call on this item?
how about some comments about the motion?
Go ahead.
No? No? Okay. Roll call, please.
Chair Dawson,
No.
Vice Chair Blue,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
No.
Commissioner Latassa,
Yes.
and Commissioner Silva.
Yes.
Okay,
Motion
that
carries.
Motion carries.
And as for the appeal, I'm going to make a motion to deny the appeal. I believe that the HBC did not err in their judgment.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Actually, a comment.
Comment.
I think it's important to note that I do appreciate what the history folks do. And I like to say that it was very important for us to listen to even some of the substance of some of the conversations here. So thank you.
Can I say something too? So I am not going to support this motion, but I just find the addition to incompatible is my reasoning for that. But I wanted to also applaud the owners of this. They've really done a great job with this property, and I hope it's not a horrible thing. The first motion that just passed, but they are doing it's really a greatly improved property.
Great. We have a motion to deny the appeal, and that motion has been seconded. Can we get a roll call?
Sure, Chair Dawson.
No.
Okay. Vice Chair Bluth,
Yes.
Commissioner Brassfield,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Latassa,
No.
and Commissioner Silva.
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries.
This decision is appealable to the city council. Applications for appeal can be found in the planning office and on the planning website. Thank you.
I'd like to say congratulations. It's probably not a thing. Moving right along. Confirm annual appointments for chair and vice chair, CEQA, exempt per CEQA. Okay, so we have a staff report.
Somewhat. It's that time of the year where we get to play musical chairs, musical chairman, musical vice chair. So as you saw, there's a staff report included in your packet that document who was, as probably most of you are aware, the council has a policy for boards, committees, and commissions for rotating chair and rotating vice chair based on seniority and experience as far as serving as chair and vice chair. And the purpose of that policy is to encourage that members have an opportunity to serve as chair and vice chair. Based on the folks that are on the commission and service as chair and vice chair previously, next up in the rotation would be Commissioner Bluth for chair. And then next up for the rotation for vice chair would be Commissioner Silva. So if they're willing to accept, this is a public appearance item, so we do take public comment. And then, but we do also would like a verbal confirmation from both of those members that they accept those positions as well.
I'm happy to do it, but it looks like the public just left.
There may be
They got
someone
offline
online.
as well.
I'm happy.
Well, they got an
I'm happy.
opportunity.
I'm happy to accept.
Wonderful. Great. It doesn't have to be voted on.
Free at last.
Yeah, for here last. You say free at last, but I think you've been chair before.
I've been chair several times.
Yeah, so it may, never know, never say never. Great. And then, so that's that item.
Does that start at the next hearing then?
It does. So you will be vice chair at the next hearing and Commissioner Bluth will be chair.
Big seat.
Do we have commissioners' comments?
Sure. So just following up.
Here we are in the middle of Hell Week.
Got more.
Just following up, the only thing we have is just recap. Most of you were there. I know that it was a long night, so some of you left before the end of the night. But on July 16th, we had the joint Planning Commission City Council meeting to consider the general plan update and the housing element update. Happy to say that was approved and adopted with some revisions, which got brought up by the Planning Commission. We did resubmit that revised version of the housing element to the state last week. So they have a legally mandated 60-day review time frame, but we're hoping to hear back from them in advance of that. And we're remaining optimistic that we'll get a certified housing element out of that.
I was talking to Hans during my recusal, and he wants the planning staff to get on the horn and call HPC and say what's going on.
Yeah.
So just a reminder.
He likes an aggressive approach. Yeah. So yeah, beyond that, we do have an item tentatively scheduled for the August 27th Planning Commission meeting. But obviously we'll let you know in advance if that's going to move forward. And that's all we have.
You do a great job, Levi.
Oh, thank you. I
And,
appreciate that.
We're in the middle of Hell Week, as the traffic division would call it.
I think it synced up perfectly with school starting back this year too. I think we had that at the end of last week. We had school starting back and then moving right into car week. And what else? What else could be? Yeah.
Comments?
I think that's about it.
I have comments.
Comment?
I have a comment. In the past, I've brought it up a couple times, the findings. When are we going to do that?
Sure. I will circle back. It's summertime, so it's kind of hard to get wrangle everyone, but I wanted to get the city attorney's office involved in a training. I think I mentioned previously, and probably include an outside counsel that specializes in these things. So as soon as I can get that arranged, we'll be setting that up. I think it's probably better to do as a special meeting rather than try to tack it on to a regular agenda, but we'll see if we have some gaps coming up.
Well, we've been having an awful lot of canceled meetings, be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So if we have a cancellation that's coming up with no items, that'd be perfect.
Next item of at the master plan joint meeting. I felt kind of rushed. You and I spoke about this in the past. A lot of things come up during the year and we mention them in a comment or, with some kind of a follow-up. I'm suggesting that, don't we have every year a separate component revolved in that master plan and reporting it?
So we update the housing element. We update the housing element every 8 years. We do report on the annual progress of that annually to HCD. So to answer your question, we prepare a report that we submit to HCD about the progress made in achieving our goals for that cycle.
So what I'm suggesting is that we use that as an opportunity to talk about issues that have come up during the year, discuss them and kind of put them in a frame so that at every 5 years, we don't run into that bottleneck. If we did that, we would have a lot of discussion here about the topics that are concerned and maybe, like I said, put it into the frame of what we need to recommend at the next 5-year increment.
So,
what everybody else thinks, but I couldn't get to a couple of them. And it was just kind of frustrating.
No, I think that's a great point. So as I said, we submit that annual report usually in February, March. They always have to be submitted prior to April. So what we can start doing is maybe bring them before this commission. Typically, we do it at an administrative level and we submit it. It is just that it's a progress report. So it's really just kind of pretty objective statements of how we've have built units or what we've done as far as implementing the programs in our housing element. So what we can do is start bringing them before this commission and agendize that for this commission to receive that report prior to us submitting that to HCD. And I think that would give this commission opportunity to kind of take a look at that and discuss that as they see needed. A great idea.
Thank you.
I'm going to point you to be on the agenda for that one.
I'm sorry?
What I would guess that you'd like to be on the committee that got that agenda together.
Committee? I didn't know we had special committees.
We'll bring it to this commission. So I mean, yeah, we can bring it.
I appoint Levi as the chair.
Perfect.
So, but anyway, thank you.
Okay, now we're done.
No mas.
Thank you.
6